If someone had asked me a year ago who I relied on most in my life, I would have instinctively said my husband. But now, watching Ranger trot beside me as we stroll through the quiet, tree-lined neighborhood, I realize how much that answer has changed. Ranger, our German shepherd, walks with a calm that betrays his size. At 5 years old, he's a steady companion, fierce when he needs to be, but gentle with me in a way Jason hasn't been for a long time. It's the small things that hurt the most, like how Jason stopped waiting for me before dinner, or how he started locking his office door even when he was home. I didn't need proof of infidelity. His distance was its own betrayal. Our walks had become a ritual, mine and Ranger's. They gave me peace, a reason to leave the suffocating stillness of our home. Jason used to join us. He used to laugh when Ranger barked at squirrels and would wrap an arm around my waist like he was afraid I'd disappear. Now, he barely looks up from his laptop when I come home. Jason Donovan was the kind of man people respected, an architect with a rising career, a schedule full of meetings and blueprints. He was disciplined, intelligent, composed. And he was slowly forgetting how to be my husband. We hadn't really touched in months. Conversations were reduced to calendar updates. Even when we shared a bed, it felt like we were sleeping in separate rooms. I tried to convince myself it was just a phase, that we were both busy. But the truth sat heavy in my chest, unavoidable and cruel. I missed being seen. Ranger, with his warm eyes and unspoken understanding, filled a silence Jason had left behind. He'd nudge my hand with his nose when I was spiraling or curl up by my feet when I stayed too long on the couch, crying in the dark. He never asked questions. He never judged. It was a Tuesday morning, chilly but bright, when I first saw Ethan again. The park was empty except for a few joggers and a woman pushing a stroller. Ranger was sniffing the damp grass, ears perked, tail swaying. I barely registered the man approaching until Ranger's ears twitched, and he trotted toward him with surprising enthusiasm. "Ranger?" the man said, crouching. "Well, aren't you a handsome guy?" The voice was familiar. I blinked twice, then stared. "Ethan Rhodes?" I asked, stepping closer. He looked up and there he was. Same easy smile, tousled dark hair a little scruffier than I remembered. "Clara Donovan," he said, standing. I'd recognize that voice anywhere. We hugged, briefly. The kind of hug that lingers because neither person expected it. "I didn't know you were back in town," I said. "Just moved here again. Opened a training center near the highway. You always had dogs growing up, didn't you?" I nodded, smiling. "This is Ranger. He's part of the family now." Ethan crouched again, scratching behind Ranger's ears. "He's a good boy. You can tell right away." We chatted a few more minutes, caught up in the way people do when time has moved too fast. He told me about his work, specializing in behavioral rehabilitation for dogs, something he'd become passionate about after leaving corporate life behind. I told him about the house Jason and I had bought and the long hours my husband was working. I didn't tell him how lonely I felt, or how I'd started waking up in the middle of the night just to remind myself I wasn't invisible. That part stayed tucked beneath my smile. Before we parted, Ethan handed me his card. "If you ever want help with Ranger, or just want to catch up, give me a call." That night, I found myself holding the card longer than I should have. Ranger was asleep on the floor beside me, curled tight, tail flicking softly in his dream. I reached down and stroked his back, murmuring his name. "You're the only one who notices, aren't you?" Jason came home late again. No explanation. No kiss. He walked past us like we were strangers. The next few days blurred together. Jason left earlier in the mornings, came home later at night. Sometimes he didn't come home at all, texting me something vague about work dinners or deadlines. I stopped asking questions. Not because I didn't want to know, but because I already did. I began spending more time outside with Ranger, watching the seasons shift around us. Leaves curled at the edges, gold bleeding into green. I took photos of the sky. I started journaling again. Anything to tether myself to something real. It was Melanie, my best friend, who finally broke the silence I'd been keeping. "You look like someone pressed pause on you," she said one afternoon over coffee. "And you've been paused for a while now." I didn't argue. She was right. She glanced at Ranger, who was curled under the cafe table. "He knows, you know. Dogs always do." It hit me then, how often Ranger would position himself between Jason and me when we were home. How he'd sit by the front door long after Jason left, tail low, gaze steady. He missed him too. But maybe, like me, he didn't know how to fix what was broken. Later that night, I opened the kitchen drawer where I'd placed Ethan's card. It was still there, wedged between an expired coupon and an old recipe. I dialed the number before I could talk myself out of it. "Hey, it's Clara," I said when he answered. "Clara," he repeated, his voice warm. "I was hoping you'd call. I think Ranger might benefit from some structured training." I lied. He paused. "I'd be happy to help. We could start this weekend?" I hesitated, then said, "That would be great." I looked down at Ranger, who stared back at me with those deep, amber eyes. He didn't wag his tail. Ethan arrived Saturday morning, right on time. He stood at my front door with a confident ease, wearing a forest green jacket and holding a small pouch of dog treats. Ranger hesitated when he saw him, tail still, eyes cautious. "Mind if I come in?" Ethan asked. I nodded and stepped aside, suddenly aware of how quiet the house felt. Jason was, of course, gone. He'd left that morning with a rushed goodbye and a comment about being buried in site inspections. No mention of when he'd return. Ethan walked in and crouched, greeting Ranger again. "Hey, buddy. We meet officially this time." Ranger sniffed his hand but didn't lean in the way he usually did with people. It was subtle, but I noticed. His eyes flicked to me, as if asking a question I didn't have the courage to answer. We moved into the living room. Ethan began with basic cues: sit, stay, come, but added small, thoughtful gestures. He didn't just train, he observed. Ranger obeyed, but remained emotionally distant, like he was performing for formality's sake. "You've done good work with him," Ethan said, tossing Ranger a treat. "But there's some anxiety under the surface. Has anything changed in his routine lately?" I hesitated. "My husband's been less present. Ranger's used to more interaction." Ethan nodded but didn't push. That restraint was part of what unsettled me most, how easily he filled space without dominating it. Unlike Jason, who made absence feel heavy, Ethan made presence feel light. We trained for an hour, and afterward, I offered him coffee. He stayed. We talked. About high school. About the dog rescue where he volunteered. About the way certain animals remember pain long after the wound has healed. I watched him, the way he smiled without effort. The way he spoke with conviction but never condescension. It had been so long since I'd felt noticed, truly seen. I forgot how intoxicating that could be. Ethan started coming by twice a week. Each visit blurred the line between training sessions and something else, something unnamed, yet palpable. He started staying longer. Sometimes we'd sit on the back porch after training, sipping wine, laughing about things that didn't matter but made me feel alive. I tried to tell myself it was harmless, that we were old friends catching up, bonding over a mutual love for dogs and shared memories. But my heart knew better. The way I lingered near him, the way my pulse quickened when our hands accidentally brushed. It wasn't innocent, and Ranger saw everything. He had started behaving differently, restless, pacing, his eyes always following me. When Ethan arrived, Ranger would stand between us, quiet but unmoving. His body tense, protective, like he understood the gravity I refused to name. "You okay, boy?" I'd whisper, running my hand through his fur. He wouldn't meet my eyes. One afternoon, after Ethan left, Jason came home early. I hadn't expected him. He walked in, loosened his tie, and glanced at the half-empty wine glass on the kitchen counter. "Someone over?" he asked. "No." I lied a little too quickly. "Just wanted to unwind." He raised a brow, but said nothing. He walked past me, muttering something about taking a shower. The scent of unfamiliar cologne trailed him. I stood frozen, staring at Ranger. He was watching me again. But this time, there was something new in his eyes. disappointment. The emotional affair escalated without warning. It wasn't premeditated. There was no grand decision or deliberate betrayal. It was a moment. One fragile, inevitable moment. Jason had missed our anniversary. Again. Not even a text. I cried that night. Alone. Ranger lay beside me but refused to rest his head on my lap like he used to. It was as if even he couldn't offer comfort now. I reached for my phone and dialed the only person I knew would answer. Ethan. Come over, I whispered when he picked up. I don't want to be alone. Minutes later, he was at my door. No questions. No judgment. I poured wine. He poured silence. We sat in the dim kitchen, moonlight casting silver over the floor tiles. I talked. He listened. I feel like I'm disappearing, I said. Like I could vanish tomorrow and Jason wouldn't even notice until the laundry piled up. You deserve more, Ethan murmured. You always have. I looked up and he was watching me, not with pity, but with longing. And I didn't pull away when he leaned in. Our lips met, soft and uncertain. A breath. A question. A risk. I pulled back first. I can't, I whispered. Not like this. He nodded, eyes heavy with restraint. I'll go. As he stood, Ranger stepped into the room. He hadn't barked, hadn't moved a muscle while we kissed. But now, he positioned himself between us. Not aggressive, but unwavering. Ethan froze. He's protective. I nodded, my throat tight. He's honest. Days passed, and I avoided both Ethan and Jason with practiced precision. I buried myself in chores, filled empty hours with noise, anything to drown the ache building inside me. But the silence between Jason and me became unbearable. He spoke in clipped phrases. Ate meals alone. Left earlier, came back later. Even when we shared space, we weren't in the same world anymore. Then it happened. Ethan stopped by unannounced. Said he'd been in the area. I opened the door before thinking. Just wanted to see how you were holding up, he said. Before I could answer, Ranger barked. Loud. Sharp. Commanding. His body tensed like a coiled spring, blocking Ethan's path. Ranger. I snapped. It's okay. But he didn't move. He growled low, deep and guttural. Not out of aggression, but something far more unsettling. Judgment. I should go, Ethan said, stepping back, face unreadable. I closed the door slowly. The silence after was deafening. Ranger walked away from me then. Not to his bed, not to Jason's office. Just away. He'd never done that before. And I knew. I knew I had crossed a line. Not just with Jason. Not just with Ethan. But with myself. That night, I stood in the kitchen, holding a glass of water I couldn't bring myself to drink. Jason came in, loosened his tie, and looked at me. Really looked. We're not okay, are we? He said quietly. No, I answered. We're not. He didn't respond. Just turned, walked to the living room, and sat in silence. I didn't follow. Instead, I went upstairs, sat beside Ranger's bed, and laid my hand on his fur. I'm sorry, I whispered. I don't know who I am anymore. He didn't move. And I realized that some betrayals don't require words to be understood. The days that followed were quiet, but not peaceful. There's a certain silence that lives in the aftermath of emotional wreckage. It's not the silence of calm, but the silence of things left unsaid. Our house became a museum of unspoken truths, each room haunted by the weight of what hadn't been confronted. Jason and I moved around each other like shadows. We'd speak in fragments, supermarket lists, calendar reminders, questions about bills, but never about what mattered. Never about the distance. Never about Ethan. Never about us. And Ranger stopped looking me in the eyes. He still followed me, still obeyed commands, but his loyalty had dimmed. I had always believed dogs loved without conditions. But maybe that wasn't true. Maybe, like people, dogs could be disappointed. One morning, Jason lingered at the kitchen table longer than usual. His coffee steamed between us, untouched. I waited, feeling the tremor beneath the silence. I saw your messages, he said, voice low. I didn't ask which ones. I didn't need to. He didn't look at me when he said it. Just stared at the rising steam, as if searching for clarity in its spirals. I wasn't surprised, he added. The words landed like lead. You've been gone for months, I replied, barely above a whisper. You checked out long before Ethan ever showed up. Jason nodded once, still not meeting my gaze. I know. There was no rage in him. No accusations. Just resignation. And that hurt more than if he'd screamed. Because it meant he'd already let go. I wasn't perfect either, he said, pushing his cup away. There's someone at work. Nothing happened. But it could've. I just didn't let it. A pause. We're both guilty, Clara. Just in different ways. I swallowed hard. The pain wasn't sharp anymore. It was dull, heavy, relentless. Do we fix this? I asked, unsure if I even wanted to know the answer. Jason finally looked at me. I don't know, he said. But we can't pretend it didn't happen. And just like that, the illusion shattered. Later that evening, I found myself walking with Ranger again. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. We passed the park, the bench where Ethan and I had once sat, where something began that should have never started. Ranger walked slowly, his gait heavier than usual. He'd aged, I realized. Or maybe I had. When we got home, I fed him, then sat on the floor beside him, knees tucked to my chest. You loved him too, didn't you? I murmured. But you knew better. His eyes flicked toward me but held no judgment now, only sadness. Maybe forgiveness. I needed to end it properly. That night I called Ethan. My voice trembled as I spoke, but I didn't hesitate. We can't see each other anymore. He was quiet for a moment. I understand. I crossed a line I never should have approached. And I hurt people. I hurt myself. You're not the only one who's been lost, Clara, he said gently. I know, but I can't stay lost forever. Another pause. I'll miss you, he said. I'll miss who I thought I was when I was with you. I replied. We said goodbye. And for the first time in weeks, I slept without dreams. Jason and I didn't talk much over the next few days. But we started being honest about everything. Not out of hope, but necessity. We shared dinner in silence at first. Then, slowly, conversation returned, awkward, stilted, but real. He told me about the woman at work, how he'd started to confide in her when he felt like I wasn't listening, how it had scared him, and instead of facing the fear, he pulled away from both of us. I didn't want to fail at marriage, he confessed. So, I just avoided it. I nodded, understanding more than I wanted to. I avoided myself, I admitted. I thought if someone else saw me, it meant I still mattered. We both cried that night. Not from anger, but grief. Grief for the love we'd lost. Grief for the versions of ourselves we couldn't return to. The decision came one rainy morning. Jason stood at the doorway, suitcase in hand. Ranger sat at my feet, quiet and unmoving. We need space, Jason said. Not to escape, but to reflect. I nodded. We owe it to each other to stop pretending. I'll stay with my brother for a while. Just take care of yourself, Clara. You too. No kiss. No hug. Just understanding. When the door closed behind him, I stood there for a long time, listening to the rain drum against the windows. Ranger brushed against my leg, then lay beside me, and I let the silence hold me. Weeks passed. I planted new flowers in the backyard, painted the guest room, donated old clothes I no longer recognized as mine. I took Ranger on longer walks. We found new trails, new scents, new routines. Healing doesn't look like redemption. It looks like progress. And some days, it didn't come easy. There were nights I still cried. Days when regret curled around my spine like a cold wind. But Ranger never left my side. His faith in me, though shaken, was not gone. And slowly, that helped me rediscover my own. Melanie came over one weekend with takeout and her usual dose of sharp wisdom. You're not broken, she said, mouth full of noodles. You're just cracked open. And sometimes, that's the only way light gets in. I laughed for the first time in weeks. 3 months later, Jason and I met at a cafe. Neutral ground. He looked tired but lighter. "I've been seeing a therapist," he said. I smiled. "Me too." We talked about what we'd learned. How we both had abandoned ourselves before we ever abandoned each other. He didn't ask if we'd try again. Neither did I. Some endings are temporary. Others are necessary. When we parted, it was with a hug. Familiar. Kind. But not romantic. We were no longer husband and wife. We were two people who had once tried and failed, but who now had the chance to begin again separately. That night, Ranger and I curled up on the couch. He rested his head in my lap again for the first time since it all began. I ran my fingers through his fur, eyes stinging with gratitude. "I think I'm finding myself again," I whispered. He thumped his tail gently. And in that quiet moment, I realized something. It wasn't the affair that had defined me. It wasn't Jason. Not even Ethan. It was this choice to reclaim my dignity, my integrity, my future. One breath at a time. One walk at a time. With Ranger beside me. Always.